Welcome, everyone. We're really glad to have you today. This is our fourth and final workshop for this particular effort that's a result of House Bill 2021. We really want to thank the work group members and the members of the public who've been joining and following along in this process. I think I want to make sure that I start off just thanking everyone for making the time. These workshops have been long, and you've had to focus and be helpful and provide information in between. And because the bill is written so that this is the work group study and not the Oregon Department of Energy study, it means that a lot of the onus for planning and for sharing information and thinking about what ought to be in the report has fallen to you all. And we're here to staff you and help collect this information, report it back out. So I just kind of want to set the stage there to start with, just the first thing out of my mouth today, because I think as we're sort of finishing up with the workshops, we still have a whole another 6 weeks of, really we have 2 months until the report's due, but about 6 weeks of work that we'll be doing as a policy staff, and we'll be continuing to work with the work group to make sure that we're getting the report right. So just know that while this is the last workshop, it's not the end of the line for our work group members. So just really wanted to set the stage there, and we'll talk about next steps at the end of the meeting as well. I'm sure you've all enjoyed looking at our mission and what we do while I've been talking, but we always want to remind people this is what the Oregon Department of Energy does. And in particular, this is an example of us providing a venue for problem solving Oregon's energy challenges. And we've been really excited to take on that work at the behest of the legislature. You can go to the next slide, please. So this is a slide you've seen before. We're recording this meeting. Just a heads up, we might click, I think it is already recording, but just a heads up on that. And then also just so you know, I'll put it in the chat in a minute, or somebody else can that's on staff, and if they feel like taking care of that. But we have a webpage for this study that has all the materials we've shared ahead of meetings, during meetings, the past recordings, and the past slide decks. So just know that that's all there. We'll get the slide deck up for today and the video up for today after today. But just know that those materials are there for you, and that after this meeting, we'll have everything loaded up in there if anyone's interested in looking back at past conversations. We are big fans of the chat here at the Department of Energy. Feel free to ask questions there, and when the time's right, we'll get those questions asked to the right person, or sometimes answer them in the chat. You can also use the raise hand function for asking a question or making a comment. Please note that this is a work group meeting, so for the most part, the chat and the raise hand function, this is to facilitate work group conversation. We have public comment toward the ends of the meeting, toward the end of the meeting. We also have breakout sessions in which we elevate anybody here from the public into the mix of that breakout conversation, and you're welcome to participate in those as a member of the public as well. So just sort of a heads up on sort of protocol there. And then we have some work group agreements that we've been using for all of our conversations at the Department of Energy, borrowed from a State of Oregon event last year. Really just hoping, as always, for an inclusive and respectful meeting. So asking that folks be respectful, consider the agenda and the time limitations that we have. A reminder that learning can happen outside of comfort zones, and sometimes you may not agree with something, but hopefully you can listen and learn. And also a reminder to listen to learn and not just listen to talk, which is like a mantra of mine because I'm a big talker. So that's you. Listen to that too. And then avoid speculation and accusation. And finally, just one piece of logistics. If you have technical issues, like we did today, or questions, you can contact Linda Ross in the chat. You can also contact me if you want about anything along the way by chatting me, and I'm happy to be helpful or make sure that a certain point gets raised at the right time or anything like that. So with that, I think I get to hand things over to Stephanie Bowles, who is our senior economist at the agency and is our lead on the report that's going to come out of this work group. And she'll be, for the most part, leading the meeting, and then I'll be helping out with keeping an eye on the chat and helping to make sure everybody's being heard during the conversation today.
Thank you, Christy. All right, so quickly, I'll just go and flash this up there since we're tight on time due to technical difficulties. So we have 3 speakers that will be presenting today. And then we're going to talk a bit about the CREP initial application round results that are still in progress, so very brief slide there. We're going to have a discussion of the guiding principles for our recommendations. Then we'll have a short lunch break. Then we're going to move straight into our recommendations breakout, have a roundup from the breakouts, discuss the outline and the gaps in the outline, and then move to public comment. So I will move on over to Christy. Do you want to take this one?
Oh, sure. I kind of already covered the first topic, but for those of you that joined after I said it, thank you for serving on the work group. Work's not done. We still have 6 more weeks together, but this is our last workshop. And then just a reminder of sort of our objective that we set to convene a work group to examine opportunities to encourage development of small scale and community-based renewable energy projects in the state that contribute to economic development and local energy resiliency.
Thank you, Christy. All right, so moving on over to our stakeholders. First up, we're going to have Mark Thaliker from Three Sisters Irrigation Project. So I'll hand it over to you, Mark.
Okay, sorry about that. For some reason, it just doesn't seem to want to let me in. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, well, anyway, so TSID has been doing irrigation modernization for the last 25 years, and we're in the process of completing piping all 65 miles of the irrigation district. We're in the process of building our 3rd hydro plant right now, which is a 300 kW horizontal Francis. Our previous projects have included 200 kW micro hydro net meter demonstration project, which has got 4 small turbines in it for a total of 200 kW. And that project was designed not only to show people small turbines, but also on-farm turbines. Because when we're all done piping the district, we're going to have over 60 locations where we can do on-farm either net meter or power purchase agreement turbines with the farmers, with the co-op, and that represents a whole nother megawatt of power. The first project was the 700 kW Watson horizontal Francis turbine, and that's where we started learning about the challenges of trying to move power purchase agreement power to PacifiCorp. CEC has a wheeling tariff, and that tariff, real quick, consists of basically $5.34 per kW per month for the distribution system, and then 90 cents per kW per month for the transmission. And so currently right now we're generating anywhere from about $150,000 to $200,000 of revenues, and that wheeling tariff consumes about $55,000 of our power generation. One of the things that I've constantly tried to talk to the PUC about is that when you do a small hydro project, you have to do a system impact study, and so we paid for that, and then basically Central Electric Co-op upgraded all 3 legs of the system so that they could then move our power either out to Tollgate and Hoodoo, or to the sister substation, or all the way over to Eagle Crest. And so 100% of our power right now is consumed by CEC. And then really all we have is a use of facilities agreement with Bonneville, and they flip our power over the bus at the Redmond substation to PacifiCorp. Well, there actually really isn't any power actually being transmitted 20 miles back to the Redmond sub. CEC consumes 100% of our power, and so in essence, we're opening up bandwidth on the transmission lines for CEC between the BPA substation and here. And so, this is kind of an inequity that is problematic. And for smaller projects, it becomes even, a bigger problem, because they're harder to finance. So ultimately, though, we've been very successful. We build all our own projects ourselves, which makes us unique. My guys have actually installed everything, as well as building the buildings and putting in all the turbines. And this particular project that we're finishing up right now actually ran into a 2-year delay because Central Oregon Land Watch tried to basically extort more water from the district. And just to explain how conserved water works in the state of Oregon, we go ahead and do an engineering analysis on the canal loss. And then when we apply for our grants, which started literally 8-9 years ago, we let them know how much conserved water we have and then how much conserved water we're willing to put in stream for listed species and fish. And then, we make that deal. And so we build basically the penstock first, and that was 6 phases, and that was a $10 million project. And we actually originally identified about 8.5 CFS, and we were going to put back 6, but ultimately we ended up putting back 8. And then that gets certificated by the Oregon Water Resources Department, and those certificates create a in-stream water right that is now protected in perpetuity. Landwatch came at us and said, no, we think you should do more. Ultimately, the county commissioners agreed with us, and the Land Use Board of Appeals agreed with us, but it cost us a 2-year delay and $200,000 in legal fees, which we were not able to recoup. So that was a whole new adventure for us. But we prevailed, and we're in the process of putting in the project. And as a matter of fact, we're kind of doing a pre-ribbon cutting tomorrow with Senator Merkley and then the Undersecretary of Agriculture at NRCS, Mr. Bonnie. And so, this, for us, it's been very successful because we use the revenues from the generation to pay down debt on the clean water revolving loans that we get from DEQ, because obviously our projects are 100% green, selling all our power to PacifiCorp, and then PacifiCorp in turn using that green energy to meet their RPS commitment to Oregon, their renewable portfolio standard. Anyway, we're real happy. We've installed $50 million of infrastructure over the last 25 years. When we're all done, we're going to be carrying less than $4 million of debt. That'll all get paid off, and ultimately we'll be generating 4 to 5 million kilowatt hours annually of green renewable energy that'll all go to PAC for the first 20 years. In addition to that, because of the pressurized system, we have conserved and eliminated 9 million kilowatt hours of pumping. And at this point, basically, Three Sisters Irrigation District is completely carbon neutral based on our generation, based on the conservation, and based on the crops that we're growing. We could, if there was a vehicle, we could probably sell carbon credits. So, I'm happy to answer any questions and dive into more detail on wheeling tariffs and some of the other things if anyone wants to ask.
Great, thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it. And way to stick to the 10 minutes perfectly. So do we have any hands raised from work group members with any particular questions? Looks like John Jennings, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Mike and then Keisha.
Hey, thank you. And thank you, Mark, for your description here. Really good stuff and interesting stuff. I guess I had 2 things. One, I guess I just want to kind of understand and make sure I understand the description, kind of the order of administration, so to speak here. So for this project, you have a power purchase agreement with PacifiCorp but you have to use CEC infrastructure, so they charge you a wheeling fee, but then CEC consumes or would consume all the power that you generate. Did I get that right?
Yes, I mean, basically, the power never makes it to Redmond. I mean, and it's not a lot of power. I mean, the three projects combined are going to be a total of 1.2 megawatts, and when we're running at low flow, that'll drop in half. But it's one of those things that there should be some sort of allowances in the state where they take a look at smaller projects. Because I refer to this as virtual wheeling. They're using the power, and basically BPA is in turn giving power to PacifiCorp that we're getting credit for. So it's just a balancing act, but there's not the actual physical act of the power being transmitted 20 miles away to the Redmond substation.
Gotcha. That's always kind of been an intriguing aspect of energy for me. Second thing, and I know there's some other hands up, but I want them to have a chance. But you mentioned Central Oregon Land Watch, and which is a local here in Deschutes County land use advocacy group. I'm assuming did you guys have to go through a conditional use proceeding before Deschutes County, and then they appealed that to the Board of Commissioners and then to LUBA? Is that how that worked?
Yes. So basically, we went through land conditional use permit. It went in front of a hearings officer. The hearings officer agreed with us about 98%. He had two technical things. A number of land use lawyers that we didn't hire pointed out to the county that the hearings officer was in error. We appealed it to the commissioners. Land Watch appealed it to the commissioners because all the points that Land Watch had brought up, the hearings officer disagreed with them on. So they upheld our appeal. They denied Land Watch's appeal. They appealed to LUBA. We won there as well, and it was unanimous on all points. And then they could have filed at the Oregon Court of Appeals, but I made it clear to their lawyers that we would be requesting legal fees on the third go-around because you're not able to get legal fees on the first two. So as a result, they chose not to push it.
Pretty good. So, and again, their motivation there was they were asking for larger in-stream contribution from Three Sisters.
Yeah, correct. And the problem is that that's why we do engineered studies, so we know how much conserved water there is. And if we turn around and start giving away more water than was conserved, then our patrons could sue us. That would be considered a takings under the Constitution. And it just, when we applied for our Clean Water Revolving Loan grants, for our loans, and for all our grants from whether it be OWEB and Pelton and WaterSmart and a number of other people, all this was all laid out 8-9 years ago. So everybody knew where we were, and the board generously agreed to put more water in as time went on for a little bit more compensation. And it wasn't very nice of them to do that. But as it turned out, nobody agreed with them. And litigation is not new to me. I've been through 12 lawsuits, and then this is a legal action. But I've now got 12 wins and 1 tie, so I'm used to this stuff.
Great. Thank you so much, John, with those questions and with those answers. We have a few minutes left and a lot of hands up. So
Okay.
Let's see if folks can be all as concise as possible so we can get through the questions. Mike, you're up next.
Thank you. Mike MacArthur with Community Renewable Energy Association. Thanks for your presentation. It's a wonderful example of what can be done if policies get lined up right. My question is, are you a qualifying facility under PURPA, or do you have a regular PPA? Non-state?
Yeah, so we're Q. All three facilities are QFs. The only difference is that the first one, the 700 kW, was a small conduit exemption through FERC. And then I actually personally worked on the legislation that President Obama signed that basically created a qualified conduit exemption where and both my 200 kW and my 300 kW plants are QFs under that, where once we meet the criteria, FERC actually exempts us from the Power Act. So we are completely exempted from the Power Act, and we are still a QF, but we are I don't have to deal with FERC on all that.
So are you operating? You're getting paid under avoided cost rates schedule, right?
Yes, paid under the avoided cost rates, which go down every year.
So is that becoming more of a problem for you going forward?
It's not a problem for us because we structure the deal with Energy Trust. Obviously, Oregon Department of Energy has been a fabulous partner with the renewable grants, and then Bureau of Reclamation has participated in 2 of the 3 hydro plants, and then Bonneville Environmental Foundation participated in the micro hydro demonstration project. So I've been able to structure the debt so that it's acceptable because the main goal when all was said and done was to create green energy, put water in stream for steelhead and bull trout and salmon, and create more water for the farmers. And we've accomplished all that at a minimal cost. I mean, a normal debt load for $50 million of infrastructure would be more like $25 million.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. And then can we move on to Keisha, please?
Hey there. Thanks, Mark. Questions for you also around the wheeling. So can you just explain why you, why you're wheeling to PacifiCorp? Was CEC unwilling to sign a contract for the power, or did you get a better rate through PacifiCorp?
No, it's not that. It's the co-op doesn't have any ability to incentivize the project the way the investor-owned utilities do through Energy Trust of Oregon. So without Energy Trust of Oregon, these projects would never happen.
Okay, thanks. And then you also were throwing out the numbers on the revenues and then the cost of the wheeling charges. What percentage of your revenues were consumed by the wheeling?
It's roughly 33 to 40%. In a drought year, it's over 50%.
Okay, thank you.
Fascinating. Okay, thank you so much. And then looks like Dave put his hand down. Thanks, Dave. I mean, I would have loved to hear from you, but yes, we should move on given that we lost time earlier already. Thank you so much. Mark, we really appreciate having you today. If anybody has any further questions for Mark, I imagine he can stick around for a few minutes and keep an eye on the chat. But but he's on the phone, so that wouldn't work. But if you have questions and put them in the chat, I'm happy to email them to Mark and share the answers with the whole group. So feel free to.
Yeah, that'd be great. Happy to answer any questions, and thank you, everybody. Appreciate the good work you all are doing, and I wish you all super luck and happy to be of any help in the future.
Yeah, congratulations with the big ribbon cutting coming up. That's clearly a milestone. So
thank you.
Today. All right.
Cool. All righty.
Would you like to introduce our next person?
Yes. Next we have Rafaela from Bonneville Environmental Foundation. And Rafaela, just tell me when you want a next slide and I will click through as you present.
Great, thanks so much, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. I'm Rafaela Sue Flanders. I'm the Renewables Program Manager at Bonneville Environmental Foundation, and I'm going to share a little bit about our community scale renewable energy project development work. I'll start with just kind of a high-level overview for those of you who might not be as familiar with BEF and our work. So you can go to the next slide. So BEF, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We're based out of Portland, but our renewables team works regionally. Other teams in our organization work nationally and internationally. And we work at the intersection of carbon, energy, and water. So we have a water team that's kind of focused on habitat restoration work. We have a K through 12 renewable energy education team, and they focus on integrating renewable energy curriculum into classrooms. We've got our team, which I'll talk about more. We're pretty project focused in the Pacific Northwest on a few different renewable technologies. And then we have a team that's focused on selling RECs, offsets, and WRCs, water restoration certificates, to companies who are looking to offset their impact. So you can go to the next slide. So our renewables team, we are only 3 people at the moment. So we have to kind of be limited in scope, but we're focused on developing projects that deliver direct economic benefits to primarily low-income and tribal communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. We work mostly in solar, renewable hydrogen, and electric vehicles. And I'm just going to be talking about solar for the sake of today's conversation, since that's what my work focuses on. But we work with several different stakeholders. Our work is rooted in partnerships. So a lot of our day-to-day work is just building relationships with stakeholders, which I've, kind of examples of the types of stakeholders that I've listed on the left, and bringing people together to identify what community stated needs are and how we can provide technical assistance, financial assistance, project development assistance to help meet those needs of the communities that we're trying to serve. And what that ends up looking like is everything in the right-hand column, providing all kinds of support from grant writing to financial modeling, RFP development, everything from kind of the ideation stage of a project all the way through installation. And then, into the future, we try to build long-term relationships with our partners and help them with subsequent projects and follow up. So you can go to the next slide. So for today's conversation, I'm just going to talk about a couple of projects as examples of the community scale work that we do. We work on some community solar projects in Portland. We, do some projects with school districts, some with utilities, some with tribes. So, there's quite a variety. I'll just be talking about a couple. But we worked with the Quinault Indian Nation last year on a project. It was their first solar project. And we had a relationship with them for a few years, but due to capacity and timing, things kind of came together in 2021. So it was a 24 kilowatt project. It was on their community center in Queets, and the Quinault is pretty remotely located in general. They're at the end of a transmission line. They experience frequent power outages. So one thing that became apparent was the need for and the desire for battery storage and resilience. So we incorporated battery storage and backup into the project. And we worked with the tribe and their Tribal Employment Rights Office, TARO, to integrate workforce development opportunities. And so the picture that you can see on the top right is of we had installers from 4 different companies volunteer their time. So we had 4 different contractors represented on this project, and they were volunteering their time on the roof, training Quinault community members on how to install panels. And we also followed up with training from Solar Energy International. So there were some classroom hours that these community members were able to participate in. So we really wanted to provide an opportunity, since there isn't a lot of economic opportunity and job opportunities on the reservation, but there are a lot of folks interested in pursuing careers in renewable energy. We wanted to give them some of the skills and knowledge to maybe kickstart that path. And so the project itself is generating at least over $2,000 a year annually in electricity bill savings for the tribe. And then we also brought in our team that I mentioned previously that focuses on K through 12 renewable energy education. And they're working with the school district, kind of using the project as a hands-on learning opportunity. So there's a link, if anyone's curious, to a video kind of recapping that project, but you can go to the next slide. So a different project, just to kind of illustrate some of the differences. Another project we worked on last year was with the Blackfeet Nation in Montana. And I know neither of these are Oregon projects, but our goal, I would say, as a whole, as a team, is to kind of create and develop replicable models, partnership models, financial models and kind of just project models in general. And so I think that, there are elements of both of these projects that are transferable and that we're trying to kind of retain and replicate in Oregon projects. And a lot of that has to do with just, the way that we're forming partnerships and the way that we're kind of trying to pair PV installations with workforce development opportunities that continue on into the future. So the Blackfeet project was another example of this. We had, again, had a relationship with them for several years, and it was a very multifaceted project. We partnered with the community college and did 4 installations on the community college campus on rooftops. And then we also partnered with the K through 12 school and did a ground mounted community solar system on the school campus. And that was virtually net metered. So the utility, Glacier Electric Co-op, was terrific and incredibly supportive. And they have been managing subscriptions. They did a first come, first serve kind of lottery system to give subscriptions to community members in Heart Butte. So those community members are now receiving discounts on their electricity bill individually. And then on this project, we also partnered with Grid Alternatives, which is the nation's leading nonprofit solar installer, and they have a very robust tribal program, and they specialize in workforce training. And so they're pictured in both of these photos on the roof and on the ground, training Blackfeet community members. And I think several of them actually ended up continuing on to get jobs at Grid on the tribal team. So kind of a similar pairing of workforce development and an installation. And this was just because this was a much bigger system than the Quinault. It's generating a lot more, over $17,000 a year in savings. And then we similarly, we actually selected our CE team that focuses on education, selected one particular STEM educator at the Heart Butte School on the reservation, and selected her as a clean energy fellow. And she essentially got to kind of work alongside the development of this project with her students. And the students got to do different projects as the installation was moving forward. So I'll stop there because I know it was a lot of information, but these are just kind of examples of the types of work we do right now. Our work is, we're still working on a lot of tribal projects, but with the recent Portland Clean Energy Fund awards and the Community Renewable Energy Grant Program, we do also have a lot of projects that we're focused on in Portland and in Oregon. So happy to answer any questions that people might have. Thank you all.
Thanks, Raph. Good to see you too. Keisha?
Yeah, thanks. The community solar project, you said that the local electric co-op is providing bill saving, is doing the transaction on the customer's bill. Were they already doing that under kind of a structured community solar program offering, and this was just one of the projects, or did they actually start doing that for this project? I find that remarkable.
They started doing that for this project, which is, one of the reasons why Glacier Electric Co-op, the co-op out there, was just terrific. And, we have relationships with utilities throughout the region, and they're obviously not all the same. And some are a lot more progressive than others in their, desire to support virtual net metering. So this was kind of a shining example of that. They were willing to try that out for the first time. I will say that after this project, they did provide feedback in that it's been a little bit of an administrative burden managing all of the information. And so I think for the next project with the tribe, they're not interested in virtual net metering just because they have their hands full right now. But it was groundbreaking just to kind of see them take that step forward for the first time.
Thank you.
Great. I don't see any other hands up, but I do see a comment. This is Nikita. She's just saying that she really appreciates the emphasis on relationship building in these projects and in meeting community needs. So just wanted to share that. Anything else from anyone before we move on to the next topic? And of course, we are happy to have questions in the chat. Rafaela can stay for a few minutes after, see if any of those questions come up, she can answer. And then we can also email her after if any of the questions come up after. There were a bunch of people that were really excited to have you come present. So thank you so much for making it work.
Yes, thank you. All right, well, I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to turn it over to Megan Levy from Wisconsin. So is she, there she is. Okay, pass it over to you. And again, just let me know when you want me to change slides.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks to all the folks at the Oregon Department of Energy for inviting me. So I've got a few slides. I'm going to whip through them pretty fast. Just talk a little bit about the Wisconsin perspective and mainly about critical infrastructure microgrids for resilience and why we decided to go that route. And it may be some way that will apply future Infrastructure Act funding. So next slide, please. I won't even read this one to you, but just like the Oregon Department of Energy, we are a state energy office, and we were created by the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975. We've got a few statutory things we got to do. The big one that I'm going to focus on is create an energy emergency plan that we can utilize in the case of an energy supply disruption. And so the risk assessment along with creating that plan is sort of where a lot of these programs have come from. Next slide, please. Why do we think about this stuff? Because we have a $14 billion problem in Wisconsin. We consume 6 times more energy than we produce. From transportation to buildings, we're getting it from everywhere. And frankly, it's not sustainable and it's killing the planet. Next slide, please. And so what have we sort of done? I've been at the Energy Office for about a decade now. Started off taking over our Energy Independent Communities program. It's a lot like Oregon. We're fiercely independent in Wisconsin. Nobody likes a mandate, but we love a voluntary program. So we invited folks to set a goal. The governor's goal at the time was 25% of the power that we consume should be from renewable energy in state by 2025. A lot of those goals, so 150 communities signed up between 2007 and 2010. A few have straggled in over the years in between. We gave big grants from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act to folks to plan, to implement. We had EECBG at the time, the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant, which is coming back in the Infrastructure Act. And it was really great to have these energy plans and to have folks following through. Now, many of these goals are 100% by 2050. And it's pretty exciting that about 60% of our total population actually lives in an energy independent community. What we learned from those grants was that the biggest barrier, other than funding, for communities is technical assistance. Folks are just not quite sure, is this the right project? Should I do solar first? Should I do energy efficiency first? Should I do them at the same time? And it's a role that energy offices can fill. I'll just mention our petroleum shortage contingency planning because we stole a concept from you all that we think is pretty brilliant, called fueling points of distribution. We're actually looking at doing a clean energy version of fueling points and distribution where we use solar and storage or a hydrogen fuel cell or battery, something to back up fueling locations so that in the event of a short or long-term power outage, we can still fuel those utility line trucks and we can get the lights back on as quickly as possible. So that's part of our overall energy security planning and response. And out of that, we decided to merge this sort of community energy planning thing with energy emergency planning. So we did a survey of local emergency managers. We found a lot of them didn't understand the energy profile of the state, didn't have a specific energy emergency plan, but many of them were super interested in things like hardening critical infrastructure with energy that's created closer to it. So along with alternative fuel vehicles. Go on to the next slide, please. And this is just in that statewide assistance for energy resilience and reliability. Got to have a good acronym, SAFER 2. We've recruited tribes and communities to do this deep dive analysis, and we don't prescriptively tell them what it is. You don't have to have a critical infrastructure microgrid feasibility study done, but many have opted for that. We do tabletop exercises. We walk folks through planning processes. We create their own field coordination group, and we usually have them identify fueling points of distribution. We've wrapped up with a tabletop exercise in April and a regional exercise where we had Deanna Henry from Oregon come and talk to us about your Western Petroleum Collaborative, which was very interesting because even though we're trying to get off petroleum, we need to understand it and we need to collaborate across the Midwest to be able to get through extreme situations. We'll go on to the next slide, please. I don't want to forget about biogas. We've done a couple of surveys in Wisconsin. In 2020, we did a biogas survey where we identified certain policy drivers. Unlike many West Coast states, we do not have an aggressive RPS. That's a problem. We do not have consistent incentives in a state where it would seem to make so much sense to have something like cow power. Next slide, please. We don't have that. In fact, most of our utilities have opted out of PPAs with large farms and with farms with digesters. But although the cow fart backpack is not on the streets yet, we are having some more kind of success with smaller digesters. And our Dane County landfill, which is the county I'm in, has now a loading dock on the interstate pipeline for folks that have smaller digesters to bring their gas, clean it up on the skid, and insert it into the pipeline, which is in Wisconsin the most sort of economically viable thing to do. But we, the recommendations from the farmers, from the municipal operators was mandate food waste diversion. Let's have a standard, more funding, more policies, and certainly something to deal with the upfront cost. Next slide, please. So there's some resources for you. You can access those surveys on our website. We'll move on to the next slide, because I just want to mention that energy justice is such a crucial component of energy security, which is a crucial component to the clean energy transition. And especially when we're talking about small scale renewables and looking at who is going to be left in the rate base if we're able to lift these critical infrastructure microgrids off. I think that's why we started with critical infrastructure, because everybody wins when the water utility is using less energy, because all ratepayers are going to benefit from that. I'll point out the labs are doing a lot on this right now. I was involved in this energy storage for social equity initiative with Sandia and Pacific Northwest National Labs. Keep your eye on that. There's a lot of folks in the Northwest who were, at least a few who were awarded. This is a technical assistance program with an eye on implementation in the future. We'll go on to the next slide, please. So Wisconsin's program, Critical Infrastructure Microgrid and Community Resilience Center Pilot Grant Program. Like I said, we borrowed ideas from Oregon in our petroleum planning, and we're not shy. We researched New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Maryland, Massachusetts, because people get all mad when we research California. They're like, that's not the same. So we looked at these other folks, and we designed a program memorandum. Next slide, please, where we outlined the strategic objectives. And I just want to point out, the biggest thing was energy security and clean energy equity. These to us are sort of the biggest issues, because this is born out of this risk assessment from this atmosphere that we have in Wisconsin, where we're vulnerable to derechos, tornadoes, flooding, big blowdowns that are harder to predict than hurricanes that you can typically see coming for quite some time. But we're really concerned with disadvantaged communities and how we can make sure that we're serving them appropriately when they don't have the upfront costs typically to invest in renewables. So I'll go on to the next slide. And we defined critical infrastructure. Your definition in law is probably similar to ours, is wide open. What's a microgrid? We told people what lifelines are. Next slide, please. And we borrowed from the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities these definitions for microgrids so that we could give tiered funding, basically. And we also threw in the definition of a community resilience center, because we found that initially I thought of community resilience centers as a single facility with battery backup and solar. Could be a hydrogen fuel cell, could be any kind of backup. We put our memo out for public comment. One of the big comments we got back is, hey, we want to be able to call a level 1, 2, or 3 microgrid a community resilience center. And we don't think that it should just be this sort of level 1 definition. So the public spoke, we listened, and next slide, please. In the 15 awards that we made to these eligible applicants, and we really got everybody from tribal nations to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, to hospitals, airports, nonprofits, and we really, and previous speakers talked about targeting those partnerships, and it's so important. Nobody's doing this alone. We really wanted everyone to work together on this. And we did find that we had great success with the sort of 15 folks that we awarded. We've just gotten those, next slide, please. We've just gotten those studies in, and they will be loaded to our, we've got an interactive story map on our website that I'll be sure to send a link to. It's not quite updated with all of the studies yet, but way up north, the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, they've actually been cut off by flooding before. They've been an island in Lake Superior. They already have 3 microgrids. They did a feasibility study to see how to link those 3 microgrids, because one of the electric co-ops that serves them has no room left on their circuits for more distributed energy. So as we look at building out small scale renewables, we need to think about those types of things. especially in a state like Wisconsin, where we don't actually plan directly with our utilities. There is no integrated resource planning. So we do a lot of policy by project like this, but we're really excited to see things like the water treatment facility, the wastewater treatment facility, the mobile microgrid that we saw a feasibility study for that will bring up 5G and internet, as well as 3 different facilities. So a lot of exciting stuff. I've got a few case studies and I'm at my 10 minutes, so I don't really need to go through all of them. I would just say that it runs the gamut from urban to rural, and I'm happy to take any questions, but I know that we're running short on time, so I will just end it there.
Great, Megan. That was really, really helpful and insightful. Thanks for coming and sharing. Do we have anybody with any particular questions? Dave raised his hand. Dave, go ahead.
Thanks, Megan. That was a fabulous presentation. Curious about the utilities' roles in the microgrid feasibility studies design. How did they participate? Were they leaning in on this? Can you help us understand whether they embraced this opportunity and worked with customers locally? Give us that dimension, if you would, please.
That's a great question, Dave. Thank you. We made a requirement that folks had to have a letter from their distribution utility in order to participate. What we didn't expect was that a consortium of our municipal utilities was actually driving a bunch of the projects, which I thought was great to see them not necessarily trying to own that. We do have one investor-owned utility in the state that has a tariff for microgrids. Northern States Power, that operates as Xcel Energy in Wisconsin, has a microgrids tariff where they own the equipment, and it's sort of like on-bill financing or microgrid as a service. And they have been kind of pushing that. They did the Eau Claire water treatment study, or participated in it. So we definitely had good participation from utilities, but they were not eligible applicants. So it'll be really interesting to see with this 40101D money that's coming out, the grid resilience and reliability money that is a formula to states. It also says you can build microgrids for resilience. And I don't know what Oregon's getting, but Wisconsin's only getting about $5 million. That's not a lot to harden the grid, just to, in the grand scheme of things. So if we were to expand the microgrid program or try to implement microgrids with it, utilities are kind of the lead there. I would probably be, and when our colleague from Bonneville was talking, really made me think about the co-ops. We're also doing a low-income community solar specific program with the co-ops who agreed to do virtual net metering for these 2 specific arrays. And they have expressed some interest in putting storage on those to see if we could get a more energy burden kind of reduction for folks if the community solar was more resilient. But just in general, we've got a lot of positive feedback from municipal and cooperative utilities, not so much engagement from the larger investor-owned utilities. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Megan.
And I just like to see a cow with a fart backpack on, so I throw that on all my slides, and
we all like it, Megan. We all like it, I promise. Great. We have another question from Oriana Magner.
Do we have time for this question, Christy?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. I'm curious if you looked at other definitions of resilience, like community stability, or definitions that extend beyond just the emergency kind of reliability issues.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And more on the sort of bouncing back and shortening the period of time that folks in the community would be inconvenienced by a power outage. We did, and we left that very broad. And part of that is because we're at the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. So anytime you sort of put a definition out, it's going to go through 500 or 600 lawyers and a whole chain of command. And it typically becomes a very, I don't want to say inoffensive, but an extremely broad and hard to argue with definition, sort of like that critical infrastructure definition. But I think we could do a better job. And I think, again, as we look at the Infrastructure Act money, we're going to have to come up with specific metrics to show what resilience means to us and to show why certain projects would be impactful. because DOE says, we only want this grid resilience money to be invested in projects with the biggest impact. What does that mean for a disadvantaged community? I would say that that Bad River project has a huge impact. It's the difference between, having the lights on and being able to run oxygen machines and being able to operate normally, and not, and possibly loss of life. So I think you're right. We should be more thoughtful about the way that we talk about resilience, particularly when we talk about equity and resilience.
Great, thanks. All right, I think we got through our hands raised, and I don't see any other questions. Really great to hear ideas from other states. This was a particular request from our state legislators to hear examples from other states, and we really appreciate Megan and Wisconsin for making the time. I'm from Illinois, which Wisconsin people don't love Illinois people, but Illinois people love Wisconsin, so it's really great to also hear from near home. All right, so we are ready to move on from this presentation section of the agenda. And if anyone has any other questions for our presenters, feel free to put them in the chat or email me or Stephanie, and we'll get them and then share them with the whole group. And thank you to all the presenters for those that are still on the line for being here.
Yes, thank you. And somehow we are back on schedule. So thank you to everybody for your help with that. All right, so next up, we're going to show you some preliminary results from the Community Renewable Energy Grant Program. I know a lot of you are interested to see how that has gone so far. So applications for the first set of opportunity announcements totaling $12 million were due on Friday, July 8th. And Odo is thrilled to report excellent participation in this first round. There were 68 applications submitted, 34 of which were planning applications and 34 of which were construction applications. And as you can see, it was a good mix of resilience applications versus non-resilience applications. Requested grants totaled around $27 million with advance requests of about $7 million. Renewable energy generation plan from all of these projects was around 30 megawatts. And applications were received from all over the state, from counties, public libraries, community colleges, fire departments, irrigation districts, tribes, cities, water and sanitation districts, consumer-owned utilities, public universities, and state agencies. Odo is currently working on the eligibility and completeness review for all the submitted applications. And after this is complete, we will move into the competitive review process. So are there any questions about that? No?
I do have one question. This is Angela from OCA. It looks like the total requested definitely exceeds what's available. I think so, yeah. Is there an opportunity for some of those applications to be funded but at a smaller amount, or is it sort of a take it or leave it kind of thing?
This was just the first round. There is more money allocated to this program. So if it doesn't get funded this round, there's definitely potential for the next round. And Christy, you can jump into.
Yeah, I'm happy to just to clarify that we don't plan on like modifying applications and sending them back to people and being like, here's the amount of money we're willing to give you for this instead or something like that. But what we are going to do is for those that don't make the cut this time, they are welcome to reapply in the next round, which we are working on. We're actually like, really, I think just like having an attitude of constant improvement is important for any state agency, and it's one we're really trying to embody with this program. So as we're reviewing applications, we're looking and seeing what should we change about our application that we can change within the confines of the statute and rule so that we can make it easier for applicants to apply and get the information that we need to make solid decisions. So just a heads up that we're right now, applications can't be turned in. The portal is closed, but that's because we want to like really take a close look at to see if there's any like obvious areas where the people are having kind of the same issues frequently or something like that. So just sort of know that we'll do a whole relaunch for the last $12 million that's available this biennium this fall, and just kind of stay tuned for that to happen. And then as people get notified that they haven't moved forward through the process, they can reapply. once that's open.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to, I think a lot of people on this call were kind of part of a pretty obvious sort of whisper campaign, I guess. Like everywhere we went, people were talking about this program over the course of the last year. And it really showed in how many folks we had turn out for webinars and how many folks were writing us with questions and interested, and then with how many applications submitted. I think it's pretty clear that there's absolutely demand for a program like this. And so, you know, I remember a year ago having folks on our team being deeply concerned that we would have trouble finding people willing and ready to apply for these funds, and to have that be completely shown to be not the case was, I think, really important for all of you as work group members in this conversation, for us, and for the legislature to see.
And it looks like we have a couple more questions. James?
Thanks.
Yeah, hi everybody, and apologies for joining a little late. And yeah, really great to hear about the launch and initial interest in this round of funding. I'm curious, kind of tying into maybe the resilience conversation, is the criteria or competitive review process kind of focused on some of what the resilience needs are in different communities, or is it just, or is there an evaluation of geographic distribution of the projects, or is it just kind of a scoring and the best scoring projects are the ones that will be selected? And knowing that, you know, I know Portland projects are not eligible, but yeah.
Yeah, fair. I mean, your perspective and consent. Yeah, I hope we're learning from you, and maybe vice versa. I don't know, but I'm happy to. Sorry, Stephanie. I'm just kind of going with this. I've been like deeply embedded in this program from the beginning. So, what I would say is all of the above. We have a score sheet, a rubric that I can find online and post in a few minutes, or that might be in our opportunity announcement. But there's a rubric that we're using for scoring for the competitive review and for the internal review, and it includes, I think, everything you mentioned. The only thing I'll say is the definition of energy resilience that we're using is we're statutorily bound to use, and it's in statute, and it's pretty specific. It's not like a community can decide what resilience means to them. It's like an energy resilience type of definition. So that's sometimes caused frustration, but the statute is what the statute is. So, for example, we've had people come to us and want to do like undergrounding of power lines, which wouldn't qualify under the definition that we have of resilience, of energy resilience in the bill. So, so that's just kind of one interesting note. But for the most part, everything you mentioned, we want to make sure that projects are geographically distributed. We have a 50% carve out for resilience projects. We have a 50% carve out for environmental justice communities. So those will be like given preference over other projects in the process.
Great. Yeah, great to hear. And thanks for the update.
Keisha?
Did you divide the funding that's available between planning and construction, or is it all one pot of money and then you'll just sort through all 68 and figure out which ones to fund? Okay.
It's the latter. Yep. We did not split between the two. The planning grants are significantly less expensive than the project grants. So, and some of them are, there's a $200,000 limit, I think, off the top of my head. I'm not supposed to talk about numbers without them in front of me, but some people put in planning grants for lower than that, whatnot. So it'll be kind of like putting together a puzzle later as we have probably more projects. Then there's probably projects we'd like to fund that we won't be able to, given the number of applications, right? It's 100,000 on planning. Thank you, Adam, for reminding me. See, I should never say numbers without them in front of me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, it looks like we've gotten all the questions on CREP. And so I'm going to move to the next section of the agenda, right on time, by the way. So next we're going to go into a guiding principles discussion for our recommendations. And so the idea here is, as we move to the afternoon and start really diving in deep to what the work group's recommendations will be for the overall report, we want to come to some kind of agreement on what we think the guiding principles for those recommendations should be. And so a couple of examples that we're just throwing out there as a starting point. We want you guys to come up with these. Where, the first obvious one, assist Oregon in meeting the state goals as defined in HB 2021. Promote equitable outcomes among Oregonians. Contribute to maintaining affordable energy for all Oregonians. Support project transparency. Consider the perspectives of other stakeholders. Consider contributions to economic development or local energy resilience. So this is where I would like to open it up to the work group and see, did we miss something? What else? What would you guys like to make sure that our recommendations focus on so that we kind of have a path forward in the afternoon discussing those recommendations? So please, work group members, jump in. Angela.
Yeah, thanks. This is a good start. I'm curious why some of these say consider. So for example, that last point about economic development, to me, that feels like it should be a support. A lot of the stories that we've heard about small projects are really about the benefits that, the economic development benefits that communities receive. So that feels like it should be a little stronger on that one.
Absolutely. This was just a quick throwing things up there to have a starting point. It wasn't a lot of thought into the wordsmithing. So good catch. And that was not on purpose. Anybody else? Oriana.
Yeah, this is less of a what else, but more of a yes and. I think it may be helpful to either qualify or add to promoting equitable outcomes among Oregonians.
Okay.
The principle of prioritizing environmental justice communities, which is part of Section 2 of House Bill 2021 and would tie into that first part of the state goals associated with House Bill 2021. And I think the second would be, it would be valuable to disaggregate economic development and local energy resilience. And perhaps to the point of my question earlier, instead of just naming energy resilience and recognizing that you all are the Department of Energy, name resilience, and perhaps we can have some discussion as a group to further define what resilience means. Because certainly for an organization like Verde, issues like addressing displacement are a key part of the way we do our energy work. And so that nuance in the definition of resilience. You also could, if you wanted to keep those cropped together, talk about consider community benefits, which again goes back to Section 2 of House Bill 2021 around prioritizing benefits for communities, and then define out what benefits are, and it could include economic development, resilience, some of these other pieces. So just some thoughts there about how to maybe add a little bit of nuance to those to that list there, but I think generally it looks pretty good.
Thank you. And it looks like Nikita agrees with you, Oriana. All right, Rep. Owens.
Thanks, Stephanie. And it's probably ingrained in all these, but some emphasis on, local ownership, community-based ownership. When we talk about equitable outcomes, I think the ownership of some of these projects is going to be very important to small governments or community-based organizations. I'd like to look at that. And also like to just agree with Oriana on the resilience. What is resilience and what are the metrics and how we're defining that for different communities? Because I think it'll be different.
Thank you. Yes. James, I think you're next in my list.
Yeah, thanks, and definitely agree with everything that has been said just in the last couple minutes. I also just had a question on the consider perspectives of other stakeholders. I feel like maybe we want to define, I guess I'm not sure what the other means in this case. Like, do we mean stakeholders outside of this particular group, or if there's some better way to kind of, I guess, define whose perspectives are being centered or considered. I don't necessarily have a recommendation there, but it just kind of stood out to me a little bit. Like, what are the other stakeholders?
I think that was more at like, you have your viewpoint, think of the other stakeholders within the group and maybe what their viewpoints would be.
Okay. Okay, that helps just in defining what that means.
Yes, that's a good question. All right.
I'm going to butt in with just one thing that I think would be helpful for folks to know that we're planning on having as our approach for the recommendations. I keep talking about it like spaghetti. I think our plan is to have a recommendations list that is sort of all the spaghetti that we get from all of you. and then there'll be decisions made by others, legislators, you all, advocates, et cetera, about what sticks to the wall for next steps. And we'll provide some information about like level of support to some extent, but I think that we want to make sure everybody's voice is heard since it's this work group study and not ours. So we're not interested in having it be consensus-based recommendations that are required to be included in the report, because we think that there might be disagreement between work group members. I mean, I think it's evident that that's the case from working on these issues through the years for some of our experts. So just kind of a heads up that the principles, the reason we mentioned the perspective of other stakeholders is we're hoping that the ideas that come forward from this group won't include something that's just like obviously not gonna happen for some reason. But if we still want that idea to be listed, we can include it, of course. But we're just hoping people will sort of consider that in what they decide to move forward. I hope that's helpful to share and give a little bit of context on like our approach. And it looks like we have Rep Owens and Angela both up, maybe again, maybe not. You're welcome to either speak up or pick your hand up.
Mine is back up again. Just one comment on the last thing you said, Christy. I like all the spaghetti on the wall approach. I would rather us not limit ourselves by what is feasible. I think it's really important for legislators to know what should happen, even if it can't happen. That's kind of what studies are for. So I know we've talked about this in the past, but I think it's a good idea to put all the ideas out there for legislators. That's one thing. And then the second thing I wanted to say is I think I'm not quite sure how to word it, but I think one principle that's important is the special benefit that smaller projects can provide as opposed to larger projects when it comes to balancing community needs and stakeholder needs. So for example, small solar projects are great for things like dual use or agrivoltaics. And that is a way to balance agricultural needs, water needs, renewable energy needs, economic development. And because smaller projects are just a little bit more nimble, they can really help balance some of the competing needs that larger projects have a harder time balancing. I'm not quite sure how to concisely say that, but I think that's a good overarching principle.
Yes, I understand. So like highlight the benefits unique to small projects. How's that?
Yes, I like that.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and start typing on the screen as you guys are talking. So just excuse that. And Rep Owens, did you have a question? Or did you put your hand down? Okay. Jimmy Lindsay.
Thanks. This is Jimmy at PGE, and I was just going to share that I think the sort of list here as written, I think looks pretty good. I think some of the suggestions sort of offered over the last little bit, I think would be worthwhile to sort of discuss in this afternoon. But I do think it makes sense to sort of reinforce what's that contribute to maintaining affordable energy for Oregonians. And perhaps we can say that a bit more precisely. I mean, given that we're talking about we have been talking about through these workshops principally about renewable energy projects, I think we can be a bit more narrow to sort of discussing, maintaining affordable electricity rates for Oregonians. Energy is a bit more, just a bigger catch-all. And I think it might make sense to be sort of precise that one of the guiding principles of our efforts would be to maintain affordable electricity rates for customers.
So change from energy to electricity rates and just maintain affordable electricity rates. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think that would be a helpful clarification.
All right. Any thoughts on that from everybody? All right, silence. Nikita.
Actually, can you hear me?
Yes.
I raised a hand. I'm not sure you could see that, but yeah, this is the Pure Showman from Pacific Core.
Okay.
I want to agree with what Jimmy just said. I think we have heard through these workshops the value that these projects provide to the state as a whole, larger communities, and so we are supportive of in any way utilities can help, but see that the larger statewide economic benefits sort of support state funding as opposed to utility funding, which would direct costs more at a smaller group, where these projects are benefit to all Oregonians.
Okay, thank
And
you.
again, yeah, the idea that we want to make energy affordable for all Oregonians in the most reliable and sustainable way. So really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sapir. Nice to have you today. Did we get to
Thank you.
Nikita? Did you ready?
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, for supporting project transparency, were you all thinking like transparency around how the project was developed, what really like where funding came from, or like yeah, just wanted to learn more about what you all were thinking about transparency.
Well, I, as an economist, will always say, if you give me data that is transparent, I'm very happy about that. That's my personal judgment on that. But I just think transparency, like knowing what's going on, what's going into these, just greater transparency so that other people can follow similar models if something worked well, just knowing what's going on in both the policy and project arena. And Christy, jump in if you have thoughts.
No, I was on vacation when you all developed these. So
yeah, sorry, forgot.
It's fine, which is great. But I think one thing I was just thinking about that relates, I think, to project transparency, although it's bigger, and I'm wondering if James might want to be focusing on me for a sec, is that James had brought up, and it's something that I think kind of like was either I don't know what we've done with it since then, but James brought up early on, like it'd be nice to be able to see all the information that we could possibly gather on small scale projects in the state in order to kind of figure out where we are and where we're going. So I'm wondering if like support project transparency might include or embody that concept too, of like that information is not necessarily collected by anyone right now in one place, that is easy to find. So anyway, just throwing that out, that I know James brought that up and I'm bringing it up for him. And now he has his hand up. So I hope Oriana will forgive if he wants to comment on what I'm saying. And then we'll go to Oriana.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, this is a kind of internal request I made, as Chris was mentioning earlier, to understand more about the ownership of projects throughout the state. And this also gets to something that Rep. Owens just mentioned as well, about it's good to know whether the policies that we're putting forward is actually leading to more diverse ownership of projects. And so I think having that baseline of what are the entities that are in the market now, and whether those are a combination of LLCs or municipal entities or tribal governments, or to the level of detail that we do have information in some of the state databases as well as federal databases about the ownership and operation of existing small scale renewables. I think it would be great to know that landscape, because ownership is one major benefit and economic driver of the reality that we'll see in the space. So, and the policies that might change as a result of this report, in my mind at least, should seek to promote new entities getting into ownership, or different models of ownership. So yeah, I think that's kind of the broad narrative of data and transparency about where we are now, and then what policies would adjust kind of that reality in the future.
I feel like I just heard about a conversation Stephanie and Adam on our team had with Minnesota, where they found out that Minnesota has this kind of really robust community solar program. You hear about it at every conference you go to. for state energy folks. And we found out that the vast majority of ownership of those projects is one single major entity. I won't name to like not make it like, well, I mean, I could, it's Berkshire Hathaway, but I don't want it. It's not like necessarily bad. It just is that it's like the majority of an entity versus a variety of entities. So.
Yeah, so yeah, I think there's a way to present the information without putting a value judgment on it.
Yeah.
And James, I did see your email right before the workshop. I did not get it into the slides, just so you know. But about one of the points that you made in your email about the project ownership, a lot of times, even some of the locally owned ones will still be under LLC. And so you just see that LLC name. And so without like getting into court filings and business licensees and stuff like that, there isn't really a way to know which ones are a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway, for that example, or a tribe.
Though I do want to push back on this if we can have a little dialogue, because in the Oregon Secretary of State business registration, that is public record, and you can search for a business name and understand the address. And oftentimes, I mean, I've just done this personally as an exercise to kind of using the EIA database. You can see where multiple LLCs will have the same exact address. And I think you can make a educated guess that the address holder is either an attorney that happens to have a bunch of different clients and has registered LLCs on their behalf, or it's the same kind of legal entity with a number of LLCs under it. So I guess I think there are ways to at least characterize the ownership, even if we're not getting down to the like actual financial structure of different companies that might be in the space.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know. That's just from like my own cursory exploration of like how might this data be collected. So
I would also just love it if we would just be given it. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
That of course would be great too.
But okay, so what else? I've tried to create this into notes in real time, but I am also trying to listen to people. So are these existing hands raised or are these new hands raised? Go ahead and just jump in if you have.
Oriana has been waiting a while.
Okay, Oriana.
Yeah, so this goes back to Jimmy's comment about maintaining affordable electricity rates. When I see that phrase in the context of small scale renewables, I get the image of Admiral Akbar yelling, "It's a trap," in my head, because the way our utility system works right now, it values things that the utilities own and not necessarily distributed energy resources or small scale PPA projects. And until we have a place or a performance-based rate making system like Hawaii, for example, that values those distributed energy resources, there's going to be a conflict between small scale projects potentially and affordable electricity rates. So I think it is probably more accurate to say maintain affordable energy or energy affordability, acknowledging some of the benefits that come from renewable energy projects that are, especially to Representative Owen's point, are owned by community or can provide other benefits that help lower, or maybe not lower rates themselves, but provide energy affordability or offset costs like community solar on bills. So I think we have to be a little bit careful there, that issue of not having any potential cost shift come from projects that are on the small scale side or the distributed energy side is important. But there's still a lot of values that come on the energy affordability side that are not necessarily specifically designed to lower rates. And so I want to make sure we don't fall into that trap and put ourselves in a position where we potentially make recommendations that could undermine the development of small scale projects.
Thanks, Rihanna. Jimmy already had his hand up, and I'm sure would be happy to respond to that and say whatever else he had in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to the extent we're like trying to identify a list of kind of consensus guiding principles, perhaps we just need to move like higher level. I mean, I think we're very much sort of in support of, community owned projects and not utility owned projects. So to the extent that anything I've said is sort of being misunderstood in that way, it's not intended to. I think just fundamentally, I think it's important to keep track of as a principle, the sort of affordability of the underlying product and the relationship between, investments that can be made in this space, and the associated like impacts on the sort of cost of the product for everybody. And so I think it's appropriate to sort of call out and anchor as a principle that we're trying to maintain affordable electricity rates for customers, and appreciate the comparison to Admiral Akbar, which is I'll take as an honorific. But the other kind of thing, just to note, and I think there's just a way to find, something that works here. But I'll say that PG, or at least myself, sort of preferred the kind of previous structure at the bottom as opposed to kind of the sub bullet space, just because I think it's important to be talking in this space, to be talking about small scale projects, and that's sort of what we're doing. And I think it's appropriate to recognize, some things that small scale projects can do well. But I think I would, I think I wouldn't sort of characterize the, economic development or energy resilience, for example, as being like a unique feature for small scale projects. And so perhaps it becomes like tricky to inline in the moment to find consensus language, but I found it to be sort of more consistent, or sort of more sensible to me to just say directly, like, support economic development, support local energy resilience, as opposed to sort of casting that as a unique feature of small scale projects.
Fair enough. Does anyone object to us like disaggregating those? I think we made the decision to aggregate them. So if anybody has objections, like, feel free to let us know. Otherwise, we can just write them each out individually. Then I don't want to, Zipur, I see your hand is up, and Angela's hand is up. I see that. I just really quickly want to, if either of you want to talk about the bullets that we are disaggregating back the way they were, or the Oriana piece of information about affordable electricity rates, let's hear from you on that. If you have a different topic, just like hang tight for a second, because I want to make sure we put those two to bed, and then we can move on to anything else.
Mine is in the same conversation here about.
Perfect.
Yeah, but it's a little bit of a response to the last comment in terms of economic development. Or shoot, I guess maybe it's off topic. Okay, I can wait. This is about the last comment.
Okay. Zipur, how about you?
Yeah, it is related. I think it's important that the way I'm thinking about this is affordable electricity rates, but also equitable distribution of costs and benefits. So I see small scale renewables as benefit to all Oregonians. And so it is more appropriate to be funded out of state funding, as opposed to only utility rates. So shifting the cost to electric utility rates as opposed to state funded. I think that's a distinction I think I would make there.
Thanks for saying that. I'm trying to think about how we can get that maintain affordable electricity rates for all Oregonians to feel right for everyone. James was wondering about like if we should consider using terminology like energy burden. So maybe Odo staff can kind of like workshop that a little bit and come back with a suggestion. Maybe we'll bug Keisha along the way. And then we can workshop it as a group. Does that seem like an okay approach to folks on that one? Because I think we hear the point, just want to get it right for everyone.
I would just highlight this. Sorry, Christy, this is Keisha. I would just highlight that Zipur used this term. She said equitable distribution of costs and benefits. And I would suggest that could be a way to reframe. maybe get some feedback on that now.
Okay.
I threw it in there just so I didn't forget the verbiage, just so you guys know. It's not an official change, just trying to remember.
I could say promote, since maybe the argument is that we're not currently doing that.
How's that?
Great. Yeah. And it might be that that needs to be a second bullet because we want to make sure that we're not raising rates too, right? So yeah. So we'll.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to say that I think those are related. So those two bullets are related, but I would really appreciate that kind of being considered.
All right. So
again, it's just
right.
I think it's the support for this is very strong. It's just we want to make sure there's no like cost shifting.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Ryan has his hand up. I know you're on deck with a new thought. Ryan, did you want to talk about this current conversation?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to real quick. One of the things that I was thinking about when the promote equitable distribution of costs and benefits for all Oregonians, I think one thing that we'd kind of talked about a little bit throughout some of these sessions was ensuring that those non-participating individuals weren't negatively impacted as well. So I don't know if it's worth adding some language to that, something like while not negatively impacting non-adopting or non-participating individuals. But I think this goes back to the point of equitable distribution of costs and then who's bearing these costs.
Mm-hmm.
So just some way to kind of capture the voluntary participation.
Trying to think of how to phrase that.
Like throw a bullet at the bottom and we could work on it.
Yeah.
All right. So I still have Angela on deck with a new thought. Zipure, are you back on this conversation? We're waiting for another thing.
Sorry, that was. I need to lower my hand. Thank you.
Great. All right. Then I think we're ready for Angela, and then we'll obviously continue the conversation here on the ones that we talked about to make sure everybody's good to go.
Well, and now I do have a couple thoughts on this last topic, so I'll throw those in. First of all, to me, it's a little bit misleading to talk about participants versus non-participants. Often, I mean, in something like community solar, yes, you voluntarily sign up for that. You are choosing to participate. In something like small-scale renewables, communities don't have exactly that same type of choice. There's, a lot of the projects that we've heard about, there was an opportunity for a particular community that someone was able to take advantage of. So that's not as if a ratepayer is choosing to participate or not. But all of these projects we've heard about result in benefits, not just for those particular ratepayers, but really for the entire system. So I want to urge us to kind of stay away from that language of participant versus non-participant. And the other thing I was thinking about when we were talking about this and James' comment about energy burden, I'm not an expert in this topic, and I think it would be great when I appreciate Christy talking about, touching back on this issue. I think it's really important because the way that, cost effectiveness and least cost, least risk, that really doesn't include all the benefits. Especially when we're talking about people with higher energy burden. So it would be great to me if when we revisit this conversation, we could have some experts join us, like Community Energy Project, that really work with low-income ratepayers and folks that face higher energy burden. I just want to throw out those two things. But moving on to my next point, something Jimmy mentioned about small-scale projects not necessarily having more economic development opportunity than larger projects. The big difference there is that small projects can take advantage of particular opportunities that large projects cannot. So for example, I think back to one of the very first projects we heard about with the small scale wind project. That's a perfect example. If that wasn't a small scale project, it wouldn't have happened at all. And so that is a very unique economic development opportunity that small scale projects bring that just isn't possible. You know, there wasn't going to be another large scale wind project there. These small projects can take advantage of very unique circumstances. You know, in that case, leftover wind turbines, and other cases, you know, unique land use opportunities and things like that.
Stephanie, do you feel like you got that?
Yeah, I'm just still trying to figure out verbiage right now and also listen to what they're saying. So
Yeah, go. Just making sure you have what you needed there.
yeah.
So I want to get that down. I think Ryan's back, so hang on, Ryan. But also James had a comment about worrying that we don't have shared definitions of equitable costs and benefits. So I don't want to lose track of that. Just making sure I say that out loud. The other thing is, while we might swing back around after our break to touch in on this again, this is our last workshop. And so we won't be having another workshop to bring experts in to parse out some of this stuff, as Angela suggested, although that would be cool. but this is kind of it. So just making sure folks know that it would be good for us to kind of settle on this. And we can also talk about it offline after this too. But just wanted to kind of let folks know that. And then I'm getting, just so folks know, I'm getting whispered from one of my colleagues also to bring something up that might be worth asking you all about, that kind of relates to what James had to say, what Ryan had to say. And Ryan, you're welcome to join in on this, and I'll let you answer first and say your piece too. But while he's talking, maybe folks can consider like kind of parsing the issue. There's some small scale projects that don't have benefits beyond that small scale project, and like the folks that are directly nearby it. Like the example that was whispered to me is like improved water quality from a dairy digester might not be something that electricity rates should cover. So maybe that would be state dollars, versus benefits to the grid that would benefit the electricity system. So would it be helpful, is my question, and then I'll go to Ryan and then we can get answers to this question. Would it be helpful to distinguish somehow between benefits to the state and benefits for the system? And Ryan, you can go ahead.
You kind of took the words out of my mouth. That's exactly where my mind had gone, honestly. And Angela, I completely agree with, you know, there's a lot of benefits that are kind of more holistic, global, and then we've got these local benefits. And this is a struggle that we've had throughout this, all of these sessions, right? There's all these benefits, but how do you determine who bears the cost of those benefits? And I think, Christy, that was a really good point. Where my mind was going to is that you've got kind of different sections of benefits, you know, and we don't need to determine who bears the cost right now. It's just that is something that should be noted, that I think I would think everyone can kind of agree on, right? There's different sets of benefits here, and different individuals, you know, should or could pay for those benefits, but there should be some voluntary nature to that decision of those individuals. Is just where my mind was kind of going.
Thanks for sharing that, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe we're kind of getting somewhere with this idea that it's appropriate for some small scale projects to be funded this way and others in a different way. Hearing the concerns from the utilities. And
just to close out the thought, yeah, on the second bullet where it says ensuring costs are not, I think that the last word is shifted.
Oh yeah, shifted. Yeah, I was just, thank you. My brain. Thank you.
Great. And then Angela, are you back, or is that still an old hand? And then also I want to note your comment too, that not having, so clean energy community energy project is not on the line here as far as they know. So she's asked if maybe they could weigh in, or just saying it's uncomfortable for her to not have them weigh in. And I'd be like happy to take this to them and provide input back to the whole group, if that makes sense.
That'd be great. Thank you. And yeah, just one more thing with since my hand is up. I feel like we're sort of missing the big picture here about how benefits in one area of the state or one community do really have benefits to the entire state in so many ways. You know, health, environmental, but even just looking at the economic development, if you have higher wages in one community because of a new project, that means higher income tax revenue for the state, which means money can go elsewhere. I mean, I feel like we're getting a little siloed here when we talk about how, you know, the participants or the community should kind of bear the costs and the rate responsibility of a project. I mean, there are benefits that we don't currently take into consideration in our methodology for rates and benefits and costs, and we're overlooking a lot of the bigger picture, I guess.
Great. Jimmy has his hand up, then James, and then Nikita.
Yeah, this is Jimmy. Thanks. I was just going to sort of weigh in on this issue of, you know, should we be differentiating between those sort of costs and benefits? And yeah, I mean, I think we can all recognize that there are, and I think utilities would definitely acknowledge that when we're talking about renewable energy projects, there are, you know, benefits associated with those projects that are attributing to the power system. And I think, you know, in case it was sort of unclear beforehand, you know, PGEs are the viewpoint that, yeah, it makes sense for, you know, utility/customers to pay for those power system benefits that are benefiting the grid and the power system. But I think it is important to parse out and appreciate the sort of suggestions from others on the call to sort of differentiate between those sort of costs and benefits that are, you know, sort of power system focused versus, you know, income tax generating focused, to borrow the last example. You know, we could consider like borrowing language that's used sort of pretty frequently in other spaces where like sort of above market costs are, you know, sort of thought of as being a quantity of costs that sort of go beyond what is sort of, you know, compensated for and sort of recognized as a direct power system benefit. So offer that if folks are like looking for language that is used in other spaces to help sort of differentiate between those costs and benefits that sort of attribute directly to the power system versus those that, you know, attribute to society more broadly, we can consider using that language to help make that distinction.
Thanks, Jimmy. So we have two other hands up. We'll get to those, and then after those, we'll go to break. This conversation's great. What I want to flag is that I am not sure, although we can try, that we can get to an agreement as a group on this. For anybody who's been kind of paying attention to this issue for a long time, it's pretty obvious that the money, where it comes from, is not something that there's necessarily going to be on agreement. So we'll consider internally if there's a way that we can try to wordsmith this in a way that we think will work for everyone, that kind of doesn't make us the deciders as an agency, obviously, or as the work group on what the appropriate source of funding is for this. Because it's not, I just don't think it's going to happen. There's just going to be disagreement. So we'll try to figure out how to like get the principles right for folks to agree with it. And then we can move on to, we need to figure out how to present the two views clearly and therefore allow room for there to be disagreement, but to move forward. So James, Nikita, James, go ahead first, then Nikita, and then we'll go ahead and take a 30-minute break when we're done with those two.
All right, I'll try to be quick.
You don't need to be.
Basically, I have a pretty strong objection with the ensuring costs are not shifted language. I mean, that seems very absolutist, first of all, the word ensuring. And the whole framing of cost shift is something that has been used by utilities in various states to fight against net metering, to really, reduce the opportunities for customer generation, claiming that any loss in revenue is somehow a cost shift to other customers. And, I just want to be very clear that that's not framing that I think makes sense in this report at all. And so, yeah, I guess without going into like a deep dive of perspectives on that topic, I just want to express discomfort with using that cost shift language in these guiding principles.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think that also feeds right into what I said right before, right? That there's just going to be disagreement here. So how do we figure out how to make both points and allow people to be comfortable with that? All right, Nikita.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure if I have anything like specific to add, just adding and highlighting some points that have been raised about just really how important it is to value co-benefits, like climate benefits that benefit everyone, and the economic benefits that Angela named that also have more widespread benefits or impacts in a good way. And also, yeah, I agree with James, and I think that just needs. I think that piece around cost shifting just needs to be like parsed out a bit if we are really exploring the range of benefits and who is just like how they're being distributed and what types of benefits we can maximize if we like address and reduce barriers. That I think that, yeah, I just think that probably, as you mentioned, needs just like further investigation.
Great. Okay, well, I really appreciate the conversation. It's been really great, and like kind of no surprise where we ended up. There's a lot to agree with, but then where we are right now, there's some disagreement. So we'll do some chatting during the 30-minute break internally to see if we can kind of come back with something and see if it works. When we get back from this conversation, and by the way, it's perfectly okay for the report to say that there's two different perspectives on these like kind of related topics, and we are happy to capture that, of course. We want to hear both and understand both. I think we do. But what I want to do is give the break. We'll come back. We have a whole chunk of the day that's dedicated to talking about recommendations and going through the outline at the end. So we'll be moving on to the recommendations and small breakouts on the other side of lunch. But it would be good to see if we could have just at least agreement to disagree within the principles, if that makes sense, when we get back. So that's what we'll start in 30 minutes from now, which means we'll come back at 11:35, just because if I said 11:34, that's too weird. See you soon. All right, it's 11:35, and this is when we're supposed to be back in action. I'd love to see like some raised hands or people coming off camera to say, hey, that they're back. When I see that we have a fair amount of people back, look at all those raised hands. I'll pretend they're smiling faces. Then we can get back into, a thumbs up. That feels very good. We will go ahead and get back to our agenda. As we discussed, we spent some time tinkering with the slide right before this break slide, trying to add in some of what we were hearing. So we kept maintain affordable energy rates for all Oregonians. And then we took that promote equitable distribution of costs and benefits for all Oregonians, and then tried to say that we acknowledge the varied perspectives on the appropriateness of using regulated utility rates to pay for benefits that do not contribute to maintaining the uniform delivery of safe and reliable service at just and reasonable rates for all electricity customers. So hopefully that kind of does the trick here as far as guiding principles, where we're just asking that as we have these conversations, people acknowledge that difference of opinion, and then a reminder that we are going with what I am now calling the spaghetti approach of including all the recommendations that we hear. We're not looking for to get consensus, because we know we will not. And a lot of that will center around this particular point. So Mark has his hand up, and then if anyone else has thoughts on our attempt to handle those two, it's the third and fourth bullet that we were trying to kind of thread a needle to like acknowledge the disagreement, but maybe find some common ground. Or was Mark just saying, hey? I'm back. Okay. I will take silence as consent and move us on. So I'll sit here quietly for like a few minutes, and then, or like I'll count to 30, and then we can move on. All right, that's 30 seconds. Silence is consent, I guess, in this case. So thank you for taking a look at that. If anybody, I mean, they're not going to hear me say it, but gets on late and wants to give feedback, we can figure that out. But we will go ahead and move on. Stephanie, if you're ready. Oh, we have a hand up. It happened.
Sorry. Sorry, I just was getting my phone oriented. I just wanted to mention, someone had local versus global as a bullet, and I think that's important. I think the bullet you have is fine, but I do think this is not just about utility rates. You know, as an Oregonian, I also feel like, you know, impacted communities in one area can benefit from these projects, but impacted communities in a different area that don't benefit from the same project shouldn't bear the burden. And I feel like someone raised that as a question. So I do think it's important that local versus global benefits.
I just wasn't sure we had agreement on that, which was the issue. So maybe we could acknowledge the varied perspectives as we put here and acknowledge the varied perspectives on that bit.
Yeah. So just, you know, a similar bullet around, you know, possible disagreements, but that's something that should be considered.
Okay. I think we can figure out how to weave that into that acknowledging varied perspectives piece. Thank you.
All right. I will move us into the recommendations portion of our session. So first, I wanted to show the work group the different points that were raised in the forms submissions. Thank you to everybody for submitting. And these are just exactly as they came. So they're, you know, just copied and pasted. That's why they're all in quotes here. I am not going to read through them word for word. I just want, you're going to get this afterwards. I'm just going to give you a high level of what's going on here. So this first one is talking about the fact that a lot of COUs that are getting their power from BPA are already getting low carbon, low cost energy. And so they just want to think about the value proposition there. Next one is basically the same idea of those low costs. Yeah, they're not grouped. They're just literally in the order in which things came, or at least that I copied and pasted. And so project funding, taking into account retail rate impacts. This is kind of along the same lines of what we've been talking about in the guidelines. Someone suggested recapitalizing the small scale energy loan program and targeting public entities. So this one is dealing with the fact that a lot of the BPA territory, they have limits on what they can put on the grid. So just some paths forward and the want of a lot of these communities to produce more DERs. There we go. And then this one, it came, actually we got a couple suggestions for this about inserting generation for capacity in this legislation. And then also looking to revise the dual use and agrivoltaic on all soil classes, and work for, sorry, I'm having, my notes are blocked by my face. Pilot projects for utilities to work with communities to have small scale projects and contribute to resilience. And pass HB 2520 from the 2021 session, fund DLCD to create rules for goal 13 in order to implement this plan here about I'm sorry, I'm just going to read this one because it's hard to paraphrase. Plans directed towards energy conservation within the planning area should consider as a major determinant the existing and potential capacity of the renewable energy sources to yield useful energy output. And then full property tax exemptions for tribal energy projects, or guide to revenue share agreements with local jurisdictions, prohibiting double taxation on tribal energy infrastructure, guidance and incentives for expedited T&D interconnection for tribal energy projects, additional state funding, incorporating more small-scale renewable projects instead of requiring utility customers to support small-scale projects through utility rates, making sure that small projects do meet performance metrics to help with reliability on the grid. And a clearer picture of what the state's long-term goals are regarding small-scale energy projects. And again, this slide presentation will be posted, so you can read through the entire text of all of these later, but just in an effort to be concise, I am just giving the top level here. All right, so these are the data and information gaps that were identified by you all on the form. So this is the next question on the form that Christy sent out. So this first one is looking for greater transparency into the existing projects in the state. And so is the second one. And then wanting to see more levelized cost of energy figures in the discussion. And in a similar vein, checking to see if avoided cost schedules have actually tracked with actual costs over time. And then making sure we adequately describe the additional benefits of small scale projects beyond their power benefits. And this one is requesting a economic analysis that compares the costs and benefits from larger scale and smaller scale renewable projects. And again, give me the data, love to do it. This one is looking at the different models of ownership, wanting to explore that more. And I know it's been mentioned already today as well. Examples of financially successful agrivoltaic projects in other states. How does someone who wants to develop a larger solar array connect with developers and also utilities willing to purchase electricity? Want more information on tribal perspectives on distribution level challenges. Demand side management, small scale generation aggregation and formation of managed VPPs. This is the last page. So that's what you guys submitted. Anything that came in this morning, I did not have time to add in, so I apologize for that. But let's move it to getting this going. So what our plan here is, sorry, Chrissy, did you have, I just saw you.
Well, I just wanted to acknowledge a comment that came in, just that there were a lot of comments focused on costs and not benefits to communities or resilience. And this is just a reminder as we move into these breakouts, if things are missing from that list and from the list that you'll also see we've gathered from previous meetings where people have brought things up, we want to hear that other perspective. So please help us solve that imbalance. And then I'll stop interrupting. Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, no, and also I think the question was phrased, recommendations, what recommendations do you have that haven't been brought up? So maybe people were just seeing that those were things that had not yet been brought up, and that's why they brought them up there. But yes, please do take this opportunity in the breakout session to bring up anything that has not already been brought up, discuss pros and cons of these different recommendations that you develop in the breakout group. Remember that this is the spaghetti. We're throwing it all at the wall, and we're going to talk about pros and cons around each of these. In general, what we noticed as we were putting together the outline, that the recommendations that you guys had thrown out in earlier workshops, they kind of fell into these 4 categories. Obviously, this is not anything that we're married to, but this is just how logically we were kind of approaching it. So for the purposes of this and organization, please break out your recommendations into contracting and rates, land use, interconnection and transmission, and other. You're going to have an ODO rep in your room who's going to take notes, and they're going to feed them into the presentation at the end of the breakout. And then we're going to discuss as a group and talk about these different pros and cons and different recommendations that we discuss in this breakout session. So the breakout session is going to go for 45 minutes. And we will come back and discuss at the end of that. Okay, so Linda, if you want to go ahead and start the breakout groups, that would be wonderful.
So hi, everyone that I'm seeing in this group. I'm wondering if this is our final group. I see Mike MacArthur, and make sure I say your name correctly. Is it Zepura? Zepur?
It's Zepur.
Zepur? Great,
You
thanks.
you can call me Z. I think it would be easier.
Okay. Well, I am Wendy Simons. I work at Odo, and please give me a little bit of patience with this. I have not been part of this particular work group or haven't followed it up to this time, but I have worked on several different projects that touch these issues. So I'm not completely unfamiliar with the issues, but I may need to ask for a little bit of help here and there. And I'm in my daughter's room, which is the coolest room in our house. That's why I have this really lovely seafoam green background and some funny pictures on the wall. With that, let me just note down who we've got in our group. I'll be taking notes, and we'll forward that on to some of the others who are working on this. As I understand it, our assignment, I'm just here to hear from work group members. So I'll be just asking this group to share with me what recommendations you see that you think should be included in the report, and we can talk a little bit or share with me what some of the pros and cons are of some of those recommendations, and then I'll try to group them under, I think we've got some categories of contracting and rates, land use.
So nice to see everybody. Stephanie, I might have done something I shouldn't have done, and I used red, but I have written into the slides with
No,
our.
that's fine. That's great. That actually was a very good idea. I am having to open up my email real quickly to email my groups over. So I don't know how we want to do this.
Stephanie, just my experience in my group, so many notes.
You're
so quiet.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we can't hear you. But Oriana wants to speak for you anyway, so.
Back.
No.
My cue to tag in here.
Well, yeah. He says there's too many notes for the slide deck, I think is what he was trying to get out.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, we can have multiple pages on each topic if you want. Adam, I know you're going to insert those real quick. So maybe we just start on contracting and rates, and Adam in live time can start adding in. I think each group was emailing him our topics. So we can just start with what's already in there and kind of just start talking about those. Does that work for everybody? And he'll be adding in each group's conversation as we're talking.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit.
I think Oriana's game to present for your group. I don't know if you guys are group one, but you're supposed to.
We were group one, but I kind of am thinking that Adam goes in and enters in each group's thoughts onto one slide, so we don't have to have each group present. We can just start talking about the overarching theme, if that works for you guys to save a little bit of time.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Okay. So he's going to be working on these, and hopefully they show up on my screen as he's typing them. We'll find out. We're going to test this in real time. So let me share my slides. Just 1 second. Sorry, I'm not quite as adept at all of this.
So I think what we're proposing, because I'm getting a question from another staffer at Odo, is actually reporting out from each group, but just doing it by category.
No, I was just going to have Adam insert everything to the slides, and we don't really do it by group. We just kind of talk about all the recommendations.
Oh, okay, fair.
I mean, if that works.
Yeah, just somebody suggested we share out, and I saw it on my screen, but.
Oh, okay. Okay, if we want to report out, we can do that while he thinks. So let me stop sharing my screen so I can access my other notes, because I was group one and we did not elect somebody else to present because we were just too busy talking. Okay, so my group was Ryan Davies, James Valdez, and Tom McBartlett. And we mostly focused on interconnection and transmission and other. So the first suggestion or recommendation we had was meter aggregation, allowing for a single interconnection point for multiple users. And other states have done it, for example. And right now in IOU territory, it's limited to a single owner for an interconnection. This would allow for a shared benefit of multifamily property or manufactured home parks to distribute the benefits to the residents in the property or park. And this would be similar to virtual net metering in COU territory. One con in this was there's a hurdle for billing departments for the whole interconnection. I mean, the virtual net metering part. Another recommendation was a better understanding of interconnections, getting data on the different interconnections and projects. Getting better transparency of capacity interconnection wise. Loosen the limitation on adding resources in BPA territory to develop more renewable development in the area. And then with the community solar program for projects 365 kilowatts and below, allow connection to the load side of the meter to allow for storage and resilience benefits. So let them island off and add storage. And then in our other category, we had perhaps adding like a forum to share best practices amongst communities, COUs, community solar projects, et cetera, to allow to learn from others and to save time and money. And that was all for group one. All right, group two.
I have no idea what group my group number was. I'm sorry, I forgot to look.
No, go for it. You can go.
I don't need to go. We put all of our stuff into the slides, so I think we're good. Unless there was anything that anyone from my group wanted to bring up. We spent a lot of time talking about like ownership and community engagement and involvement and how we can have a recommendation around that. So we put that on the other slide. But otherwise we put our notes directly in.
Okay.
So as we typing, the time comes, you'll see our stuff in red.
Perfect. So was it Jessica or Wendy?
This is Wendy. Am I mute?
You're good.
Great. So I was not very efficient at how I took my notes, so my apologies. I was trying to work on making them easier to put into a document, but I will convey what I can remember. Number one was a couple of possibilities for studies of looking at the cost of small scale projects versus the the prices that utilities are paying generally for their renewable energy acquisitions, and also at how closely avoided costs have tracked actual costs over time for renewable projects. The second one would be to increase the maximum cap for standard contracts under PURPA for solar from 3 megawatts to 10 megawatts at a minimum, and possibly higher to match the definition of small scale renewables at 20 megawatts. There was also a recommendation around just working on a common vocabulary and definitions, realizing that there are some specific definitions for eligibility, for instance, under the CREP program, but that PUC is also working on a broader definition of resilience for HB 2021. We also have a recommendation to consider a feed-in tariff for small-scale projects. We had a few different types of recommendations around making community solar easier to use, perhaps increasing the size and dealing with interconnection issues. And it seems like I've got one or two more. Also maybe some consideration around how under some of our current programs and systems that energy storage can be compensated. And in general, I think there was support in our group for expanding the CREP program, and thoughts that that would be popular, especially as a lot of these projects come to fruition. And then our last, or no, sorry, we had two more. Maybe trying to make something a little bit simpler than the current community solar structure for affordable housing and manufactured home parks. And then the last one was to recapitalize the SELP program, Small Energy Loan Program, or Small Scale Energy Loan Program. The program itself is still on the books, and given that interest rates are currently increasing, that could help with financing for some of these small scale projects. So, sorry, long list.
Thanks, Wendy. So Oriana, we're going to take you up on tagging in for Adam.
Sure. So our group had more of kind of a philosophical weedsy discussion on a few different issues rather than adding a lot of new ideas to the space. And I'll just hit on a little bit of kind of where we spent some time processing and thinking and had some really thoughtful conversation. The first was on the issue of what kind of the balance should be between grant funding and dollars that come from taxpayers or the state general fund versus ratepayers, and naming that the word rate-based is perhaps not the correct one in that slide, because that can have a specific connotation associated with how utilities are paying for something or the nature of that project. And that also triggered us to add a new idea, which is performance-based rate making, and that conversation, which at some point will happen in the Public Utility Commission and came out of the Senate Bill 978 process. But shifting that utility business model or how rates are set and the way utilities are valued for their elements of their system rather than necessarily what they are building is a way to potentially provide that ratepayer contribution to small scale projects to supplement the grant side of things. But some concern from folks about, what should ratepayers bear the cost of versus taxpayers, and we had some very robust discussion on that front. The second area we spent a lot of time discussing on the contracts and rate slide was the issue of expanding the standard contract language, and some discussion about whether 3 megawatts meet the economies of scale versus like a 10 megawatt or a 20 megawatt project. But then some questions about, are there going to be community projects or community-based work that happens at that much larger scale than 3 megawatts, and some discussion about whether community projects should be relocated to that smaller size or whether they could be more expansive. And that kind of ballooned out into conversation about community ownership and the opportunity for collecting profit from larger scale projects. They're looking at a developer type model, but through a community cooperative ownership model for energy, and had some discussion about how that might work in a market space and how that might play out. And then with that was some discussion about the costs and risks associated with community owning anything, and where there's opportunity for wealth building versus wealth loss in the process, and what some of the responsibilities and risks are associated with allowing communities to own a project and not just receive the energy benefits, but also potentially receive profit as well. And then as we got through the last couple of slides, we had some discussion on the transmission side of looking through some of those different issues and the land use and conservation. And I would maybe turn to Keisha and Jimmy, who had some comments there, if they want to add their thoughts on both of those slides.
This is Keisha, and I was just pointing out, I didn't have an idea for legislation, but just pointing out that the dual use issue goes beyond photovoltaics and agriculture to farm waste and biodigestion and waste stream diversion, or hydroelectric projects that generate water efficiency as well, and that those are the kinds of projects that can only be developed at the local where the resource is community scale. So maybe something that focuses on ensuring that we're going as a state, that we're going after those types of projects, dual use, dual benefit or multi-benefit projects.
Yeah, and this is Jimmy. I just, with those sort of two things that came up in group discussion worth calling out, I think it felt like there was, at least there was support over multiple members in the group in recommendations that were centered around sort of expanding the funds and the duration of funds to support sort of the ODO renewable program support effort that was described earlier this morning. And then sort of separately, just in the last slide, we had some discussion about the suggestion with respect to regional transmission organization. And I at least was sharing my viewpoint that that given just like the scale and nature of that, particular sort of change in our energy market infrastructure, that it felt like a little bit of a tail wagging the dog, and that perhaps we can note, perhaps it'd be appropriate to note that, a market design change can help in select instances for bringing renewable, small scale renewable resources online in a more streamlined way, but that we not go so far as to say that, the benefits and also like costs and detriments of a RTO have been kind of evaluated by the working group. So sorry, Adam is still experiencing a technical difficulties, but those were a couple items of discussion I wanted to mention.
Thank you. And so finally, that was everybody, right? All four groups? Everybody's group is represented? Okay. All right, Adam, I know you're having technical difficulties, but how goes the inserting into the slides? Is it about ready? If I start on the first one, are you good? Are we going back with the silence is acceptance thing, Christy?
Yeah, he said he's good.
Okay.
It's in another venue.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen then. Give me just 1 second. And I did test it, so as he updates, it will continue showing. So share screen 2. There we go. All right. So here is the first page. So let's go ahead and talk about contracting and rates to start things off. Would anybody like to comment on any of these? We've mentioned all of them except for the ones in red, I believe. Christy, if you want to go through your group's red ones real quick, and then we can just launch into questions, comments, historical observations.
All we added was just this, considering that energy rates change and long-term contracts can be problematic, is all we added on here.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so does anybody have any comments?
Stephanie, you're just looking for additions in the red text throughout the whole slide?
It can really be anything. It can be additions to the text. It can be just if you agree, disagree, pros, cons. We just want to have some meat surrounding the recommendations.
Yeah, I think just one thing I'd just observe is that sort of changing and expanding like PURPA thresholds may not be sort of a targeted policy solution for community-based renewable projects, given the fact that existing thresholds, allow for direct contracting with, multi-megawatt project sizes that would be larger than those customarily built out for community purposes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you meant by that comment, Jimmy. Can you rephrase that?
Yeah, I'm just sort of, my point is that to the extent that the work group is trying to focus on ideas that are facilitating small scale renewable projects and community sized renewable projects, that it's not generally true that like we need that PURPA thresholds need to be expanded because of the fact that, at least in PGE's instance, the existing sort of PURPA contracting processes allow for both 3 megawatt solar projects, 10 megawatt solar projects under standard rates and contracts, which are just project capacities that are larger than those that are sort of traditionally thought of as community-sized projects. That's my point.
I see. We're also talking about projects up to 20 megawatts, since that's the definition of small scale for this group.
Yeah, understood. And I mean, just to kind of expand on that, I think it's worth, clarifying that there is no sort of limitation to enter into through QF contracts for 20 megawatt projects. In fact, the threshold looks up to 80 megawatts.
Right, but this language is about standard PURPA contracts. This is about standard contracts, which are limited to 3 megawatts for solar.
Yeah, understood. I mean, I think, we can kind of dive on this a little bit, but I think my point, I think, is one I still would make, which is, those differentiations between standard contract rates and negotiated contract rates relate to project sizes that are appropriate for less sophisticated counterparties and more sophisticated counterparties. And it's my viewpoint that, policy solutions that are targeted for community scale projects and, sort of less sophisticated renewable developers and community renewable developers, that already exists within like the PURPA construct.
I don't need to start a back and forth here, but I disagree with that characterization of community projects being less sophisticated. I'll just leave it at that.
One thing I'll just remind everybody of is that, remember, we're going to have the spaghetti approach, so we don't have to have consensus on an agreement, although it's helpful to note sort of just how much disagreement there is over things versus like if there's things that people are like all like, yay, this is wonderful. So it's good to hear the difference of opinion, but it's not one that we need to settle. Hopefully that's helpful to hear and be reminded of.
I see a hand up. Mike MacArthur.
Can't hear you, Mike.
Okay, what I was saying is that the point of PURPA, it was designed to create competition, which would then drive down the costs for ratepayers overall. And in order to be competitive, sometimes projects need to be bigger. but standard contracts are a much more efficient way for them to do business. And so that's why we're advocating for larger thresholds for standard contracts.
Thanks, Mike. All right, do we have any other comments on anything else on this page? There's a lot of stuff here. No? Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. We can come back to this one if we change our minds. All right, so this one is the land use. All right, so anything here? We have permitting, dual use. We already had the conversation a bit that Keisha mentioned about also discussing other types of dual use with biodigesters. Anything else here?
This is all stuff that my maybe group 2 added so far. There might be other things that come in from other groups as we are able to grab notes from each conversation and add things. But one thing was just the expand dual use in agrivoltaics. One concept for that recommendation was to ask for legislative direction to have DLCD update their rules so that there would be that process where multiple stakeholders are involved in that conversation. So that was just what that piece was. And then we've had update goal 13 in other places in the form and everything. So that's nothing new, but and feel free, Mark O or John, if you want to say more, but we put up SB 762. That's the big wildfire omnibus that passed in 2021. And there's been some real lessons learned on sort of the just how a conversation can get bogged down. So just heads up that is why we stuck that in there. So what that means. And then the technical assistance or easier process, particularly for tribes, came from when, oh, what's wrong with me? Maggie Talmadge presented. That was something that came from that. So just sharing ours.
I don't see any hands raised. John, did you have something to say?
I did not.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move to the next slide then. All right, so with interconnection and transmission, I think some of these were your groups too, Christy, the red, I'm guessing.
We just added the speed up decision making and implementation of interconnection, which is a countrywide problem, if not more than that. But definitely deserves to be mentioned here.
Yes. Okay. I see a hand raised. Mike MacArthur, sorry.
Okay, I can do it. Yeah, I don't know exactly the reasoning behind it, but it's my understanding that in the RTO areas, it's much more difficult to do small scale.
Does anyone know anything about that? I can't bring anything to that conversation.
I can concur on that, especially for QF projects. I think there's a way to do an RTO that would work with QFs, but it would need to be very specifically, accommodated.
I think specifically the in an organized market, the utility has no obligation to buy under PURPA, and because the asset owner is capable of selling into the market without the utility.
Right. Okay. Any other comments on this slide? Oriana.
Yeah, I just want to raise one issue that comes up in more rural parts of the state where there's more transmission infrastructure than distribution system infrastructure to connect to, which is the transmission capacity issue. So finding ways to carve out or allocate excess capacity to community-based projects or community benefiting projects would be an important way to help get those projects built in areas where that is an issue.
Okay. So I'm just real quick, Oriana, would that be in places that are above, like they have more demand, they're growing, they have more demand than what they're getting from BPA?
Yes.
Okay.
That's generally where the issue comes in. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to confirm I understood what you were saying. All right. Anything else from this slide? All right. Then we go to other, which has gotten very full.
Sorry, can I just add one thing on the last slide?
Of course.
We're moving a little fast. I know we're under time crunch, but in the red bullet point there, I think transparency should be added there. Oh, sorry, it's kind of in the first one. Okay, never mind. Sorry about that.
No, not at all. It's an important topic, so we understand. All right, and we can come back to any of these as you've had more time to chew on them. So we have time to spend with this. So we're not in a time crunch. I'm just moving forward while people are thinking about earlier topics. Okay, so this is the other slide. We have a lot going on here. We mentioned the small scale energy loan program. We've talked about a lot of these. Is there anything that is coming to mind for discussion? Anything more around the ownership? That seems to be a lot of these bullets are surrounding ownership.
This is Jimmy. Just on bullet point number 2, I think I imagine there's, or I just know there's sort of different viewpoints here. I think I'd observe that this this exact provision of law was just changed in HB 2021, within the last year. And just judging by the decision of the legislature and weighing in on that language very recently, PG wouldn't support sort of recommending the legislature revisit it and change it again.
All right, I don't see any other hands. Anybody? Oh, we got some. Here we go. All right.
Comment on that.
Mike McCarthy, go ahead.
That provision actually, the capacity generation argument has been going on for a very long time. And all that happened in 2021 was to extend it from 8% to 10%. We still believe that it was originally intended to be generation, not capacity. And there's a long legislative history of how that happened. But the intent was to be based on generation. And but the only change by 2021 was to increase to 10%.
Okay. Superior, you put your hand down. I don't know if you still had a question. Okay. Anybody else have comments about anything on this slide or any of the prior slides? Open up. This is your workshop, your recommendations. We want to hear your thoughts. Superior, there you are. Go ahead. You are muted still.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so I just wanted to concur that what Jimmy said, that in the legislative session, this did come up and was discussed, and the capacity requirement made it in. after consideration of both capacity and generation. So I would say, you know, again, there's disagreement on this, but we did this capacity versus generation discussion was considered in the most recent law.
Okay, and like Christy has mentioned, we can note the disagreement, and it's just we're putting all the recommendations out there for the legislature to consider. What else? I'm going to flip back to the first slide and see if anybody's thought of anything. Want to make sure you guys have time to discuss. James.
Yeah, I guess I just want to name something that I didn't see on here, but is an active discussion among the investor-owned utilities and some municipalities, which is the element of the House Bill 2021 that allows for creation of, I guess, municipal green tariffs or power mix that is defined by a local municipal jurisdiction, and then allows for more specific goals to, and in terms of both community benefits and what types of resources meet the goals of that community. And so I just wanted to note that as a policy piece, that we should make sure that, I guess, recommendations that are made also help enable that. I know that, you know, we in the city of Portland are considering that approach, as are a number of other municipalities. And so it was just one big thing that I just realized hadn't been mentioned before, but is, I think, a tool that could be woven in with a lot of these other recommendations. So yeah, I don't know if it's a specific recommendation or just acknowledgement of that that process that was enabled by House Bill 2021. And my understanding is that some of the utilities are looking to put forward a program model in the coming year to the PUC, and then, you know, work with municipalities. So yeah, I guess that's probably what I'll say for now on that, but just wanted to raise it.
Thank you. Tom.
Yeah, on the greater transparency from BPAs to allowable projects, it's I don't know what that's aiming at, but I mean, I can give you the short version for a utility, small utility, is that if it's under 199 kW, go for it. If it's between 200 and 1 megawatt, you need the administrator's approval, and over 1 megawatt, you're going to get into take or pay, and that's if you're just a tier 1 utility. Utilities are into tier 2, they can meet that tier 2 obligation with anything they want.
Yeah, I think that was more geared towards what we discussed in our group, Tom, where like in the future, allowing more flexibility.
Yeah, and I think that will come with the next contracts.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so any thoughts about that or the municipal green tariffs? Any recommendations specific around those, or anything else? Right, just to spark your interest, I'm changing slides again, just seeing if there's anything that comes to mind. You're awfully quiet. Nothing. Okay, we can move to the outline portion of the session if we're ready.
Sorry, I'm having trouble tracking between all the different slides. One of the suggestions that Asia had made was about better rules and ways for storage to be compensated. Was that? I know Clea supported that as well.
Yeah, I don't see that on this. That would be under rates. I don't see that it's made it there yet, but it's, you know, it is on the list for sure.
Okay, great.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, storage is a complicated one for sure. All right, thank you, Angela. Any others?
Stephanie, before we move on, as people continue to stare at this and think if there's anything missing, I think maybe it's helpful to remind folks about the process on this that I sent along. I know we'll talk about next steps at the end, but specific to this list, we'll be compiling it and then sending it out one last time too for you all to take a look at, because it's your report and study and not ours, right? So we'll be sending sending this list out once it's fully complete so that you can review it.
Yes, for sure. Thank you, Christy. All right, Jimmy.
Just a process question for you, Christy, on that front. I mean, I know we've been engaged in the exercise this afternoon that we're kind of describing as this, you know, spaghetti, you know, get all the ideas out there. You know, tell me a little bit more as to, you know, the process to going from like a spaghetti type list to something that is being represented as like a group recommendation.
I don't think we plan on having there be consensus group recommendations necessarily. Stephanie, I think you've been the most articulate on kind of how you're planning on.
Yeah. So essentially, we're going to present all the ideas that were brought up, all the recommendations from this work group, and we're going to kind of talk around them. So as you saw earlier, there's certain topics that there are divisions on. We're going to articulate those divisions. And then the ones that, you know, have a little bit more, like just a little bit, they're a little less controversial within the group. Those will not be presented with as many differing viewpoints, for example. But all of them are going to be in there. The list is not going to get whittled down in that regard. So it's going to be the spaghetti till the end. It's just going to have articulation around the ones that have, you know, basically objections or different viewpoints will be discussed. But that's really all that it's going to be. Does that make sense, Jimmy?
I guess so. I mean, just to kind of clarify as a useful exercise, like basically right now we're engaged in, you know, anyone can say anything that will just then will ultimately like be a bullet point that will go to the legislature as part of the report.
Yeah, and we're just going to call them like work group member recommendations versus work group recommendations. And we'll be sure that it's very clear that these are all the ideas that we heard. We did something similar with the RTO study that we did at the end of last year. So we're kind of following that same model of what we want to avoid is the Department of Energy being an arbiter of what there's consensus about. And we weren't necessarily asked to provide consensus recommendations. So I think that that's our logic. We want to faithfully represent the viewpoints of the members, and there's not agreement among all of the members. So how can we best do that? And so this is kind of the approach that we've developed, is just to make it very clear that that there might be some consensus recommendations, and then those would be potentially elevated and mentioned as ones where there's more support, as Stephanie was saying. But yeah, not cutting anything because there's disagreement about them.
Right.
Understood. Thank you.
And then we're going to send you what we put together with this sort of language and things like that when we send the draft report. So there can also be comments back from you all saying it's still not hitting the nail on the head for me, that it's clear enough that there's not consensus around these or something like that.
Okay. So now that you've had a couple more minutes with some of these. Is there anything else before we move to the outline? And does anybody need me to go to a specific slide? I'm happy to change it to a specific slide for a minute. No? Okay, well, then let's move on over to the outline and other gaps in knowledge. Okay, so here's another one where I am just going to exit out of, oops, nope, not that, wrong button. I'm just going to take your comments. Hopefully you have had some time to review the outline that we circulated. Obviously the recommendations section was not complete because that is something we were hoping today would build out as we have so far. So any comments from anybody based on what you saw in the outline so far? Someone be the first brave one to speak.
I can help. I think James already identified one, and thanks to Adam for reminding me that there was an ask for us to identify ownership of current projects or of existing projects.
Yes.
Have that be included in the report potentially.
Yes, I wish Rob were here, one. But since we don't actually have a lot of visibility on that necessarily, as I know James and I actually talked about it in the breakout. He was in my breakout group. And so yeah, we're gonna look into it, see if we can tease anything out, but there are limitations to the data, and we'll see what we can do. Anybody? Oriana.
Be helpful throughout the report to just differentiate between recommendations that are specific to investor-owned utilities versus consumer-owned utilities, or where a recommendation might have to be applied in slightly different ways. I do feel like the discussion in this work group has been very focused on the investor-owned side of things, and that might be a thing to acknowledge as well, or that there may be further conversations or data collection that's necessary around the barriers associated with consumer-owned utility project development.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone have any thoughts about that or anything else?
Apparently we're doing a great job.
That's what I'm taking away from this.
It could be that we could also maybe welcome people to get back to us by tomorrow or something if they'd like with any comments.
Yes, and I do realize this is a very long meeting, so people might just be needing more caffeine at this point in their day.
Yeah, fair.
While I type, Christy, do you mind filling the silence?
I'm happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah, so today's a Thursday, right? And I know we want to get writing on the report. I think our next steps are going to be working on the recommendations though. So maybe we'll talk and we'll send an email follow-up. We'll resend out the outline that we sent last week and offer, we'll tell you how long you have to give any feedback on that based on Stephanie and I talking offline and figuring out her next steps for writing the report, because she'll need your thoughts on the outline in order to do the drafting. So we'll send a follow-up email on that. Ideally today, I'll see if I can get that out to you all. I think we also need to, if we want to consider posting the outline online, we could do that too. If you want, Stephanie, we can have that conversation for the folks that are on the line that are not work group members potentially. But essentially, we'll follow up on next steps for outline comments. And And yeah, did I fill the silence okay with meaningful and actually important content on next steps? Okay, great.
All right. Any other comments?
I think we're good.
Okay. All right. I guess that you've already discussed the next steps. I can put my presentation mode back on. So yeah, Christy's already discussed the next steps. We're going to be circling back to you about more recommendation comments, more outline comments, and then moving forward through drafting the report and getting your feedback, because this is your report. And so do we want to move it over to public comment?
Stephanie, before we do you think it'd be helpful? I'd have to pull it up, which is annoying, but kind of general timeline. Like I think we kind of have a general, like just so folks can kind of be aware of what's coming. Expect like the outline will come this week. When do you think by when we should be trying to get the recommendations, draft recommendations? Do you know off the top of your head?
I can't. I'd have to pull. I've closed my email because I hate those notifications popping up while I'm presenting.
When I write with the outline, we'll like send along kind of like a timeline for. I think I already sent it. I just will kind of find it in an email and include it so you kind of all know what's coming. But if anybody is on, when I send it out, if you have like a vacation that's an issue or anything like that, reach out and let's make a plan B. There's a few people who couldn't be here today because it's like a midsummer meeting. So we're working on meeting one-on-one with those folks. So we'll always find ways, because I think we want to make sure that before this goes off to the printer, if you will, we've had everybody have a chance on the work group to say okay. So I'll just leave it at that, but I'll send a reminder with that timeline when I send out the outline. And then we're curious if, I know Senator Dumbro had to go catch a flight, so he left a little while ago. But Mark Owens, did you have, I'm really working on calling you Mark, but then there's other Marks. So anyway, do you have anything that you want to say or any thoughts as one of our legislative members as we end our final workshop?
Thanks, Christy. One, thank everybody for the time, the 4 workshops. They've been good for me to sit and listen and learn. I've been learning a lot about energy for the next 3 years. I do appreciate and look forward to the report coming to try to give the legislative body more direction. Christy, I do appreciate that you didn't try to go to consensus, because I don't think we would have got there. We got spun around the wheels, and we don't really get to consensus a lot in the legislative body too. So bringing forward those ideas that maybe aren't supported by all, but are important for my colleagues to hear is important. So thank you, Stephanie and Christy, for all the work you've done and everybody that's joined. So.
Thank you. And then we've also had members of the public that have been with us, and Stephanie, maybe we can see if we have anyone that wants to give public comment today.
Yes. Linda, I don't know how that works, but I'll defer to Linda and Christy.
They can raise their hands and then Linda can unmute them.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can see the list of the public if there's any hands up. And as of right now, there are none. So if anyone would like to raise their hand and make public comment, now's the time. And I'm going to count to 15. Right, I don't think we have any public comment today, but we've had this, there's been a few people who I think sat along with us through this whole process. And I just want to say thank you for making the time and appreciate you listening.
I'll go to the thank you slide, which snow on a 100-degree day here in Portland is interesting. But all right, well, thank you guys. We appreciate your help, and we look forward to getting this report out for you guys.
Keep an eye on those inboxes.